I stayed silent for a long time, not because I had nothing to say, but because what I felt was too real to rush. Love teaches you patience. It teaches you how to listen to your heart, to the pauses, to the moments that scare you because they matter. There comes a point when silence stops protecting you and starts holding you back. Tonight isn't about being loud. It's about being honest. It's about choosing love over fear, truth over timing, and courage over comfort. I didn't speak because I was afraid of losing you. I finally spoke because love deserves a voice, and this is that moment. I stayed quiet longer than most people would have. Not because I didn't feel anything, not because my heart was empty, but because it was full in a way that scared me. Some feelings don't knock on the door, they move in without asking. They rearrange your breathing, they change how you walk through ordinary days. I carried those feelings gently, like something fragile and alive, afraid that one careless word could break what was growing inside me. Silence became my shelter. I told myself that love could survive without sound, that presence was enough, that actions would speak in ways words never could, and for a while that felt true. I learned the weight of restraint. I learned how powerful unsaid words can be. Every look held a sentence. Every pause carried a paragraph. Every almost confession stayed folded behind my ribs, waiting for a moment that felt safe enough to exist. I watched time pass in small, meaningful details. The way your name felt in my chest even when I didn't say it. The way my thoughts kept returning to you, not urgently, not desperately, but naturally, like gravity doing what it's always done. Love didn't rush me, love waited with me. But silence changes shape over time. What starts as protection can slowly turn into distance. I felt that shift before I understood it. I felt it in the moments when I wanted to reach for you with words and stop myself. I felt it when my honesty stood at the edge of my mouth and I swallowed it back down. I told myself I was being careful, but deep down I knew I was being afraid. Afraid of changing things, afraid of losing something beautiful by touching it with truth. Afraid that speaking might make love smaller instead of stronger. The truth is, love doesn't ask you to disappear. It doesn't ask you to stay hidden forever. Love asks for courage, even when your voice shakes. It asks you to show up fully, not perfectly. I had to learn that being quiet wasn't the same as being strong. Strength isn't always endurance. Sometimes strength is exposure. Sometimes it's letting someone see exactly where you stand, even if you don't know where they'll move next. I replayed conversations that never happened. I imagined different versions of myself, braver versions, quieter versions, versions that spoke sooner or later. None of them felt right until this one. Because timing isn't about calendars or perfect conditions. Timing is about readiness. It's about the moment when staying silent costs more than speaking. And one day, without drama, without a sudden push, I realized that day had arrived. I didn't wake up fearless. I woke up honest. There's a difference. Fear was still there, sitting calmly beside me, reminding me of all the ways things could change. But love was there too, steady and patient, reminding me why it mattered. Love didn't demand a speech. It didn't demand poetry. It just asked me to stop hiding behind quiet gestures and half-truths. It asked me to let my voice catch up to my heart. So I spoke. Not loudly, not perfectly. I spoke in the way that felt most true to me. I didn't dress it up to impress. I didn't strip it down to stay safe. I let it be what it was. Real, vulnerable, unprotected. Speaking wasn't about claiming anything or expecting something in return. It was about alignment. About finally letting my inside world match what I showed on the outside. Love changes when it's spoken. Not because it becomes stronger or weaker, but because it becomes visible. And visibility is a risk. Once something is seen, it can be judged, misunderstood, or even rejected, but it can also be met, it can be held, it can be returned. I had to accept all of that at once. I had to accept that speaking didn't guarantee an outcome, it only guaranteed integrity. For a long time, I thought love meant protecting the other person from my truth. I thought restraint was kindness, but real kindness is honesty delivered with care. Real love doesn't manipulate silence to control outcomes. It respects the other person enough to let them know where you stand. I wasn't trying to convince anyone. I wasn't trying to persuade. I was simply standing in my own truth and letting it exist in the open. There's a strange peace that comes after you speak something you've been carrying for too long. Not relief exactly, more like stillness. Like the part of you that was bracing itself finally gets to rest. I felt that stillness settle in my chest. I felt lighter. Not because love ensured anything, but because I stopped fighting myself. I stopped editing my feelings down to something more acceptable. I stopped pretending the silence was neutral when it was slowly becoming heavy. Love deserves clarity, not urgency, not pressure, just clarity. It deserves to be named when it's real, to be acknowledged when it's deep, to be spoken when it's ready. I didn't speak to rush the future. I spoke to honor the present, to say, this is where I am, this is what I feel, this is the truth of me right now. People talk about bravery like it's loud or dramatic, but sometimes bravery is quiet and slow and deeply personal. Sometimes it looks like choosing honesty even when no one is asking for it yet. Sometimes it's saying one simple thing that took years to form. Finally, I spoke not because I wanted to change the story, but because I wanted to stop hiding from it. Love taught me that silence can be beautiful, but it shouldn't be permanent. It taught me that waiting is only meaningful when it's paired with intention. It taught me that feelings don't lose their value when they're shared, they gain definition. By speaking, I didn't give love away. I let it stand on its own. I don't know where words will land once they leave your mouth. You can't control that. All you can control is whether they're true. And mine were. They came from a place that had been patient, respectful, and deeply aware of what was at stake. They weren't rushed by fear or fueled by desperation. They were shaped by time, reflection, and care. Finally, speaking didn't make me vulnerable to someone else. It made me vulnerable to myself. It asked me to stop pretending that I was okay with silence when I wasn't. It asked me to admit that love had grown beyond quiet gestures and needed air to breathe. I didn't speak to be heard. I spoke to be honest. And honesty, when it comes from love, is never wasted, even if it isn't returned in the way you hope, even if it changes things, even if it introduces uncertainty. Love that stays hidden forever doesn't stay pure, it fades into regret. I chose not to let that happen. I chose to meet love where it was instead of keeping it locked inside where it couldn't move. There is dignity in saying what you feel without demanding a response. There is strength in opening your heart without trying to control the outcome. I didn't speak because I needed reassurance. I spoke because I respected love enough to tell the truth about it. Silence had taught me many things, but it had taught me all it could. Speaking was the next lesson. And whatever comes after, whatever direction the story moves, I know this much with certainty. I didn't betray myself by staying quiet. I honored myself by finally letting my voice match my heart. I used to believe that love was something you guarded by staying quiet, by holding back the parts of yourself that felt too exposed to share. I thought love was strongest when it was careful, when it stayed within invisible boundaries that kept everyone safe. But over time, love taught me something different. Love doesn't disappear when you tell the truth. Love either grows into something real or reveals what was never meant to last. And that lesson took time to settle into me. There's a moment when you realize that your heart has already made its choice, even if your voice hasn't caught up yet. I lived in that space for a long time. My heart was steady, sure, and calm, while my words stayed behind, unsure of the ground they would land on. I watched myself become fluent in restraint. I learned how to smile without explaining, how to care without naming it, how to stay close without stepping fully forward. From the outside, it probably looked like patience. From the inside, it felt like unfinished sentences piling up inside me. Love has a way of asking questions without using words. It asks you who you are when no one is watching. It asks whether you're choosing silence out of wisdom or out of fear. For a long time, I convinced myself it was wisdom. I told myself that love didn't need proof, that feelings didn't need to be spoken to be valid, and that was partly true. Love doesn't demand constant reassurance, but it does ask for honesty, and honesty doesn't stay quiet forever. There's a difference between protecting something and hiding it. I had to learn that the hard way. Protecting love means handling it with care, with respect, with patience. Hiding love means shrinking yourself so the risk feels smaller. I didn't realize when that shift happened, only that one day I felt smaller than the feelings I was carrying. Love was standing tall inside me, and I was bending around it, trying not to disturb the balance. That's when I knew something had to change. Speaking up didn't come from impatience. It came from clarity. It came from understanding that love deserves to be acknowledged, not tiptoed around. I didn't want love to exist only in my thoughts, safe but unseen. I wanted it to breathe. I wanted it to have room to become whatever it was meant to be, even if that meant accepting outcomes I couldn't control. Courage doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like a decision you stop arguing with. I didn't suddenly feel brave, I simply stopped feeling willing to keep quiet. The cost of silence had grown heavier than the risk of truth, and once I recognized that, speaking felt less like a leap and more like a step I had been standing in front of for a long time. Love finds its courage in truth, not in grand declarations or dramatic moments, but in the simple act of being real. Truth is what keeps love from becoming a fantasy. It grounds it in something solid. I didn't speak to create a moment. I spoke to be aligned with myself. I wanted my words and my actions and my feelings to exist in the same place instead of pulling in different directions. There's a vulnerability in letting someone see you without the armor of silence. Silence can make you seem composed, unbothered, in control. Truth removes that illusion. It shows exactly where you stand, and that exposure can be terrifying. But it's also freeing. Because once you're honest, you no longer have to perform. You no longer have to manage impressions or anticipate misunderstandings. You simply are. I had to accept that love doesn't guarantee safety, it guarantees meaning. When you speak from love, you accept that things may change, but change isn't always loss. Sometimes it's clarity, sometimes it's growth, sometimes it's the beginning of something deeper than what silence could ever sustain. I wasn't chasing certainty, I was choosing authenticity. For a long time, I believed that if something mattered enough, it would be understood without explanation, that the right person would just know. But understanding isn't mind reading, it's communication. And love that stays unspoken can be misinterpreted, overlooked, or underestimated. Speaking wasn't about asking to be chosen, it was about making sure I wasn't choosing absence over presence. There's a quiet respect in telling the truth without pressure, in saying, "This is how I feel, not this is what you must do." I didn't speak to demand anything. I spoke to give love the dignity of being acknowledged, to let it exist in the open, where it could be met honestly instead of imagined silently. When love is spoken, it changes the person who speaks it first. Regardless of how it's received, something inside you settles. You stop negotiating with yourself. You stop replaying scenarios in your head. You stop wondering what might have happened if you had been braver. You become someone who chose truth over comfort. And that matters more than most people realize. I learned that silence can preserve peace, but it can also preserve distance. And distance, over time, can too RN love into something lonely. I didn't want my feelings to become a private archive of moments that never moved forward. I wanted them to live, even if that meant accepting uncertainty. Love that never risks anything, never fully exists. Truth has a weight to it, but it also has a steadiness. Once spoken, it doesn't chase approval. It doesn't beg for reassurance, it simply stands. I wanted my love to stand on its own, not hide behind careful gestures or unspoken intentions. I wanted it to be clear, not perfect. There's a misconception that love should always be calm and effortless. But real love asks things of you. It asks you to grow. It asks you to confront your fears. It asks you to show up, even when you're not sure how the story will unfold. Speaking was part of that growth. It was me saying I trust love enough to let it be real. I didn't speak because I was tired of waiting. I spoke because waiting without honesty had stopped feeling respectful to myself. I realized that my silence was no longer an act of care, but an act of avoidance. And love doesn't thrive in avoidance. It thrives in presence, even when presence feels vulnerable. There's strength in knowing that you can tell the truth and survive whatever comes next. That strength doesn't come from the response you receive, it comes from the integrity of your choice. I chose to let love be seen. I chose to let my voice reflect my heart. I chose not to hide behind what was unsaid. Love that finds its courage in truth doesn't rush outcomes. It allows space. It allows honesty to exist without forcing resolution. I wasn't trying to write the ending. I was simply refusing to stay silent in the middle of something that mattered. I wanted to meet love where it was instead of keeping it at a distance out of habit. Once you speak, something irreversible happens. You can't go back to pretending you didn't feel what you felt. But that's not a loss, that's progress, that's maturity, that's choosing to live fully instead of cautiously. I didn't want my story to be defined by what I almost said. Love deserves to be brave at least once. Not reckless, not loud, just honest. And honesty doesn't need an audience, it only needs intention. I spoke because love asked me to, because staying quiet was no longer aligned with who I was becoming, because truth felt like the most respectful thing I could offer. And in that moment of speaking, I understood something clearly. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision that love matters more than the fear. And when love finds that courage, it doesn't look for guarantees. It simply steps forward and exists in the open, steady and real,